Welcome to the podcast, Whiskey and a Map. Stories of adventure and expeditions as told by those who live them. I'm your host, Michael Reinhardt. It has been said that many adventures and expeditions start simply with a map and a glass of whiskey, a desire to go and see the world's wild places. You're invited to pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, and join us as we hear stories from another one of our friends just returned from the field. I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine, Amos Rodriguez. Amos was born in the Central American country of El Salvador. Growing up amidst the violence of that country's civil war, Amos saw friends and relatives killed, or some who simply disappeared. These experiences forged his survival skills, both in urban and wilderness settings. In the post-war years, Amos worked helping rural communities devastated by the violence. These people helped him to better understand his native heritage. Thus, he began a personal, spiritual journey that eventually led him to the Oglala, Lakota, on the central plains of the United States and their Sundance Ceremony. Along the way, he learned and then taught wilderness survival skills, ventured into the wilds to live as his ancestors had, and competed in the television program Alone. Amos's story is a quest for understanding and enlightenment. Amos, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good.
Your life has been a search for both a physical and a spiritual journey, and we're going to get into that. I believe that led you to the Oglala, Lakota, and the Sundance. Before we get there, I'd like to understand what started you on this journey.
I was an outgoing child, always wanted to go explore in the woods around my house. Always like to go and see what kind of trees, what kind of fruits I will find out. And I always had an interest in people. I feel like here later, I consider myself a humanist. I also like classes like sociocultural anthropology classes. So I've always been really interesting of what we humans are, what are we doing, how do we express culture. Always been interested in seeing what's out there on the other side,
Growing up in El Salvador during the Civil War, what was that like?
At the beginning, it was not as dramatic. And when I was a child, I enjoyed playing soccer with my neighbor kids. I lived in the suburbs of San Salvador, and there was still a lot of green spaces for me to go play. I grew up in a church, Emmanuel Baptist Church. My father was a pastor of a church. My mother was a deacon of the church, and I went to Sundays to church. I went to school. I played in the afternoons. I did chores. I used to go and play in the woods. And slowly that started to change. The population of the city of San Salvador started increasing. So these suburbs were right next to the city. They started getting populated. So I saw machinery coming and taking down all the trees I used to play in. I saw the creeks with the colorful fish I used to play with. I saw them starting to get contaminated, started to disappear. Later on, when I was more like 8 to 10, then you start seeing the direct impact of the war. I could see that the conflict, even though I didn't completely understand it, I could see that the conflict was getting more intense. You see more soldiers on the streets when you go visit your families on the countryside, and you see soldiers, you kind of like, what are they looking for? There are sporadic attacks in the countryside. You can start seeing more kidnaps and assassinations. The clergy was being targeted a lot during the time. A lot of priests and pastors of churches that were committed to communities, they were started to get targeted. At the beginning, it was not like a full-blown war. I grew up still enjoying being a child a little bit. And then as the time went by and the conflict increased, then started to get more and more intense, where by the end it was bullets flying everywhere, planes dropping bombs, just real straight up conflict, war like. I don't know how to explain it, really intense conflicts. Lots of dead people, lots of massacres.
And this actually came to affect your family directly, did it not?
Yeah. My uncles, one of my uncles was in the National University. He was a student union leader, and he was targeted by the military or paramilitary or the military police forces. They came to the house and picked him up, and they took my other uncle with him. My other uncle was really young, was like 13, 14, and they were both taken by the military. My family looked for them. This was a common thing back in the day. They will take you to clandestine jails. They're underground torture chambers that the military will use to subdue the people. Anybody that was accused of or labeled as insurgent or socialist or communist or like a guerrilla, if they will just like think that you are associated with a union or anything like that, you could be targeted. And they will take you. They'll come pick you up, and you basically you'll be lucky if you're not disappear. So my family looked for my uncles for a few days. When they finally found them, they found them in the city dump with a lot of signs of tortures, irons in their legs, electrocution of their testicles, bags of poison in their heads. Just, they were basically tortured to death. My parents were also captured. You see, a lot of clergy, a lot of pastors, a lot of church people were being targeted. Even though my father never was no guerrilla with guns and stuff. He was just a pastor, but we work with poor communities. We had a church that had a strong commitment with poor communities. But having this commitment with poor communities made us a target. We had water programs, education programs, agricultural programs. We received money from non-for-profits in the United States or Europe, and then we in turn do programs in El Salvador to help these communities that are being devastated by the violence. But because we're actually helping and organizing these poor communities, the government saw us as the enemy, I guess. So they did capture my parents as well.
How old were you at the time?
I was about 10 when my parents got captured. I was 10 years old. I was able to escape when the military came. I remember they stormed the house. There was like truckloads full of military people. There were people running in the roof, breaking through the windows, breaking through the doors. It was a big commotion. They were beating people out. We were welcoming my father that was coming from Mexico from a pastor's conference. And so my grandparents were at the house, and they were just like beating people out with the rifles, throwing them on the ground, tying people in the hands. And I remember seeing them ripping the mattresses with their knives and taking away all these cassette players, all our music, and all my dad's Bibles and all the books that he used for studying. They were all taken away as evidence. But they didn't tie the kids. They didn't tie me. I was just 10 years old, but I remember my father telling me I have coins in my pocket. And I immediately knew that I could use those coins to get on the bus to go tell the church that we're being targeted by the military. So in the middle of all the commotion, I put my hands in his pocket. I grabbed as many coins as I could grab. And I ran, man. I went through the house zigzagging, and all these military people were trying to catch me. I remember the guy in charge told one guy to go after me. But I was a really scared 10-year-old, not knowing what was going on. So I was running for my life, It was like They couldn't catch me. So I ran. I remember seeing this guy behind me, but he had all this weapon. He was not catching me. It's my neighbors yelling, "What's going on?" I'm like, I don't know. I just gotta go, So I went and jumped in the bus. When I got to the church, I remember the church was surrounded by the military. So one lady helped me go through the circle of police. She grabbed my hand. She saw me in distress, and she's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I just gotta get through these people to go to the office of the church." And she grabbed my hands and like, "Come here, you're my grandson." And she moved the military people aside and like, "My grandson and I need to get through." And she got me through, and I thank her for getting me through, and I kept running. I went to the offices of the church, and there was somebody there that as soon as I came in, I was like, the military is at my house. They're beating my parents up. So she said, "Come on, let's jump in my car." We went and parked a little far away, and we saw they were taking my parents. They had bags in their heads. And then we went to the Human Rights Commission. That's what most people did back in the day when they were being targeted by these military people. We will go to the Human Rights Commission and do a declaration. We fill these forms on what happens, when it happened. And then, my parents basically went into these torture chambers for a few days. A few days, we found my father on the streets. He was alive. And a few days later, my mom appears in the court system. There was a lot of people from these non-for-profits in the United States that were asking what has happened to my parents. So we were lucky. I was really lucky. My parents were really lucky that we did not lose them during this time. But my mother she was raped and tortured by these military people. Rape was a tactic, or is still a tactic being used by bad people to subdue populations. It's being used all over the world. And they beat them up, but luckily they didn't disappear, or they didn't end up dead. My mom spent a year in jail. Of course, they didn't prove anything against her, but all the court process, she has to go through the system. And eventually my mother got out of jail, got out of prison, but then we were still being targeted by these military people. They will come to my house when we were away, and they will just destroy everything, not knowing what to do. So we had to go into hiding for a while things cooled down a bit. It was those times were pretty difficult. By then, the war has moved to the cities from the countryside, and there was a lot of fighting going on.
Hard way to grow up.
I wouldn't wish for kids in the world to grow up this way. It'll make you grow up really quick, and it shows you what bad people can do. But also it can affect you because of the post-traumatic stress disorder, all the damage from this violence. Sometimes instead of turning it into a vision of clarity of what's going on, maybe it turns you also into a violent person, because violence breeds violence. So out of the people that grew up in El Salvador during the time, a lot of people turned into gang members, organized crime clubs. It was just like the Wild West. It was just anybody that could get some weapons, and if you can kidnap a few people, then you can get some money. It's like, it was a difficult time.
The war ends. What did you do then?
With my church, we did a lot of post-war help to the communities that has been affected. There were people returning from refugee camps from Honduras, people that have been chased by the military out of the country. So we were helping people that were returning to El Salvador. We were helping the communities that were being targeted. Like we will receive food and we will take it. So I helped the reconstruction process in these communities for a bit. And I started receiving groups of people from the United States and Europe that were helping the reconstruction process. And I will be like a guide. I will set up a place for us to go in the community, for us to go work. And I remember I traveled a bit in Guatemala, in Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. I started backpacking, started discovering. I was really impressed the first time I went to Guatemala, and to see the richness of their culture, the different language, over 30 different languages being spoken. It had a big impact on me. I was like, this place is only 4 hours away by bus from my city, and all these people are dressed up in this Mayan clothing and this colorful, beautiful language. And I just was really impressed by that. So I'm like, why this doesn't happen in El Salvador? We're only 4 hours away. So it was a beginning of a discovery, or the beginning of my search for my self-identity as a Salvadoran. I feel like after the war, just having a little bit of breathing room gives you the time to start thinking about your self-identity. And I was starting to become a young adult. So it was, I think, the time for me to think about those things. And traveling has been one of the biggest learning experiences in my life. I feel like by seeing how people express their culture in other traditions, I've been able to open up my mind a little bit. So I always enjoy doing that.
Eventually, you made your way to the United States, and you came here to go to college?
Yeah, I live in Indianapolis. I've been in Indiana for the past 20 plus years. Actually, my friend Tim Krause, he was the head of this non-for-profit here in Indianapolis called Companion Community for Development Alternatives, and he graduated from Manchester College. And I was helping this NGO with their delegations in El Salvador. So he offered me a scholarship. Well, he didn't offer me. He asked me, hey, do you want to try for this? We can write it to a few churches that can help you with the money. We can try to ask the college for a scholarship. And we started the process. So I applied. I was able to get accepted. I needed to pass this English test. So I went to Scotland for 6 months for an intensive English course. I know Scotland is a crazy place to go learn English because their accent is really strong, especially because I was in Aberdeen, like in the Highlands. So, but I think it helped because it made me listen more carefully. I was like, I really got to pay attention to what they're saying because this doesn't sound anything like in the movies, you know. But after Scotland, I went back to El Salvador, and then I flew to Indiana to go to college. So I went to Manchester College.
And what did you study?
Art, fine arts. I really enjoy painting and drawing and sculpture. That's what I did in El Salvador. I specialized in restoration and conservation of all paintings and all murals.
Now, during your studies at Manchester, you were introduced to the making of primitive weapons. Is that correct?
It was right after college. I met my friend in college, Matt Schul. He was studying survival and primitive skills while I was in college, but every now and then we will see each other.
So after college, you get introduced to primitive wilderness skills. What attracted you to that?
I think it's the same journey that I had been on, the search for self-identity as a Salvadoran. I consider myself a native of this continent. I feel like a lot of times we are labeled, like people will label us like a Mexican or a Latino or a Salvadorian. But in my worldview, I feel like I'm descendant of the original peoples of this continent. So I started like trying to figure out, who am I? Who are natives? What do they do? What do they, how do they live? In college, I had the opportunity to go to South Dakota to see a ceremony run by the Afraid Bear and American Horse Tioshpayes, Lakota groups in the southwest corner of South Dakota by Slim Buttes. Uncle Tom and Auntie Loretta have been running this Sundance for a while. Tom is a Mohawk, but he's married to Loretta, Afraid Bear. And they, by seeing the natives of this northern part of the continent, I was able to identify with them. It was almost like a vision, like, oh my God, this is almost like, this is the kind of stuff I'm looking for. Like, I didn't know people still do these ceremonies. The ceremonies went underground. They were forbidden. They were illegal to do. Until President Jimmy Carter in 1979 signed the Freedom of Religion Act. Then some of these ceremonies started to come up in the light. But people that hold these ceremonies, they're still pretty jealous of them because of all the damage that has been caused to their culture by colonization. So I felt lucky to attend this ceremony and to see it, and I felt really identified with it. So I started working more into primitive skills, the making of primitive weapons like bows, arrows, primitive fire.
And with those skills, understand that you've gone into the wilds with just those skills to hunt and to experience the wilderness in that fashion. Tell us about that.
Yeah. It's like, I feel like it's one of my favorite things to do, to try to go out. For example, I do primitive hunting. It's a really difficult thing to do. Not a lot of people can make your own bow, make your own arrow. The arrow needs to match the bow. Sometimes it's more difficult to make the arrow than the bow because you have to match it properly to your bow. Try to take your own equipment, a stone point on this arrow, and try to get really, really close to big game animal like a white-tailed deer. Just without a gun, without scopes, without it's a big challenge, and I always enjoy challenges.
Does any particular outing, hunting trip in this primitive fashion stand out to you?
Well, no, like the first time I got a stone point on a deer, that was a big rite of passage for me. The first time you make a fire with a couple sticks that you find in the woods, that was a rite of passage.
Is there a spiritual aspect to these outings?
Absolutely. So when I go into the woods with primitive weapons to go for a sit, even if I just go for a sit in the woods to check nature, to scout, sometimes you have really, really important times in your life. Sometimes these times can be very transforming, very, very intimate, very transforming, and very fulfilling. So sometimes these things can happen out there when you are fully immersed in nature, especially if you take the time to do this properly. Like, by properly, in my own way of seeing it, is like with full attention into what nature or the environment or the God wants to show you, And sometimes this can be really transformative times when you're out there by yourself in the woods. And sometimes it's just little tiny things in nature, little small things, watching animal behavior, watching beautiful days. Sometimes it's just like a bliss. You feel like happy to be alive.
The Lakota have a ritual, a vision quest, I believe they call it. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with that?
Yeah, the Humblecha.
And have you got on a vision quest?
Yeah, the Vision Quest is the Lakota call it Humblecha. It's a time to go out by yourself into the woods and to basically every time that there is a really important decision to be made that you need to think about it, or when there is a rite of passage, like when you're becoming from a teenager to a young person to a young adult, sometimes this vision quest take place. Also, the Sundance that I do with the Lakota Indians is like a big vision quest.
Do you remember your first vision quest?
Yeah, I went to Hoosier National. I set up a bison hide, took no food, and I tried to abstain from water and food and any commodity like fire, anything that, take no knife, so you're not out there just carving stuff. Basically, it was just the time that you take out there in the woods. I remember my third day was really, really special for me. It's almost like I don't know, like going to like a bliss situation. If you really, there's techniques that you can do when you're in Vision Quest that I tell people that they could use. One of them is tree preaching, like talking to the trees. Even though it sounds a little crazy, the trees, I believe, can take all your questions and they can listen to you. The ground can take a lot of the baggage, the bad energy, whatever you want to take, and they can recycle it and turn it into a good thing.
Would you be willing to share that third day with us?
Just my third day, it hasn't been like a really nice day. We have had some like stormy situations going on. I remember this big storm was brewing, and I was like, man, I don't have anything but this bison hide. I'm just out here in the middle of the woods. The night before had been like I've been woken up by a big animal. I don't know what it was, but I was rolled up in the bison hide, and I just heard this animal like sniffing around me, and I just like got up really scared, and this big animal ran away so quick. I'm like, what was that? So I was like staying up, and then the night before I saw like something coming up in the hill where I was, and it came into my thing, but it went away, and I'm like, what's going on today? It was like my third day. This is so intense. I mean, something that could scare a lot of people, but you have to stay put. You're out there, you're trying to see if you can make it 3 days and 4 days and 4 nights. The next morning it was really stormy. A storm was brewing, and I'm like, man, it's like the third day. I got one more day to go. So the storm just kept rolling, and it kept rolling and kept rolling. Every 15 minutes, every half an hour, every hour, like, no, it's about to start raining right now. And the storm just like completely went around us, but it was so intense. And I couldn't believe that it was not hitting me. The storm, I was like, what's going on? So I was really elated, really happy that the storm hasn't hit and the intense night I had before. So I started like doing kind of like stomp dancing, like dancing on my own. And I started going into my head about why I was doing it, because sometimes you can question yourself. It's like, what am I doing? This is crazy. I got no food. I got no water. I got no fire. I'm here in the middle of these animals in the woods. You're crazy. Get out of here, But that's your brain trying to help you survive it, because you're out there trying to figure out if you can do it. But once you get past that climax and that third day, for me, it was really, really special. I started seeing things that I hadn't seen before inside me, and I started believing in what I could do. And it was like a bliss situation. It was almost like, I don't know, when you're like, eat a lot of candy and you feel super happy. I don't know how to explain it. Then the last night was pretty tough because it was long. But then the next day it was over. And it was like, whoa, I can't believe I did that.
Amos, In all of these ventures into the wilds, when you're using these primitive skills, what's the strangest or most interesting thing that you experienced or saw out there?
It's really strange when you see those little remnants of magic out there, when you see miracles happen. Also, when you're hunting, I remember this has happened a few times now. When you are really connected to the land you're using or to the animals you're hunting, sometimes you can see it happening before it actually happens. You are in a spot sitting on the ground or up in a tree branch, and you know the trails, and you will think about it. This deer is gonna come. It's gonna be a buck. It's gonna be like a typical A pointer. It's gonna come from over there, then it's gonna turn here, it's gonna come here, and then it's gonna come right there, and then it's gonna go that way. And then it happens just like that. Sometimes those situations afterwards are like, what? What did just happen? Did I just think about it and then it just happened? So I feel like when you are trying to strengthen the connections to your place, strengthen connections to your environment and to yourself and to your ancestry, I feel like a lot of those little clicks of magic sometimes happen. I remember feeling a little low one time in my quest. I was like, man, I haven't caught fish in a couple of days. I really need to get 3 fish today. And sure enough, I go check my gill net and my set lines, and there's 2 fish on my gill net and 1 in my set line. And I'm like, I just thought about having 3 fish today, and the same thing happened. So sometimes those little things make you a believer in like magic or in miracles or in like something helping you, or it's your own brain. Like, it makes you think about it. And it can get spooky out there too if you start going into that path. If you like, your dreams become very real too when you're out there, and so you can get really intense dreams too, and it could get spooky that way too. But yeah, I just feel like those moments when something like that unexpected happened, that's when I've been most impressed. When I was like, whoa, I can't believe that happened. Like, that's amazing.
Let's go to Oglala, Lakota Sundance. What is the Sundance and what is its purpose?
Yeah, the Sundance is this big ceremony. It's one of the most sacred rituals of the Lakota. There are a lot of Sundances. There are a lot in Lakota country. In Pine Ridge, there's a bunch of Sundances. Some of them are very strict. They only accept natives to go. And there are other Sundances that are more open, that they will accept other natives and white people from other places to dance. And some of them that are kind of in between, like our Sundance leaders, like, they're very accepting of other cultures dancing it. But basically, it's a very big vision quest. It's a time of fasting. We abstain from food and we try to abstain from water for 4 days. We go to sweat lodge every morning at the beginning of the day. We go do several rounds of Sundance during the day.
Okay, what I want to do is kind of stop you there and kind of walk through each of the stages. After that time that you got to watch a Sundance as a guest, you were invited to actually participate in one.
Yeah. So I went as a guest. I was helping Rachel. Rachel was the cook for the supporters, because there are 2 main camps. There is a camp for the dancers, and there is a camp for all the supporters, because the dancers are trying not to talk to people. We're not even touching people. We're just trying to stay on your prayer, basically. And then there is a big camp of supporters where people can eat, drink water, and when the Sundance is happening, people travel up to the camp on top. So I was helping in the kitchen for 4 years, basically. I just helped, and I was just really called to be out there helping. But my last year in the kitchen, I was really called to actually to dance. I just, for some reason, I felt a really, really strong calling, a big vision. I saw myself dancing out there. I didn't know why or how. It was my last day out there. And I went to talk to the Sundance leaders. I told him, I don't know why, but I have this urgent calling for dancing. And he said, you are one of us. He told me the steps I needed to do to get ready for Sundance, the things I needed to prepare. So the next year I could dance.
And what did you need to do to prepare for your dance?
Well, there are specific things that you have to do. For example, I had to make my own pipe. The pipe is called, in Lakota, it's called the chanupa. It's a red stone called catlanite. It's mined in Minnesota, pipe stone. Minnesota, the natives mine it there. Basically, the red stone is what we use for the bowl of the pipe, and a stem out of wood. So I carved my own chanupa. And basically, when you're doing these special items, you have to do them in prayer. You cannot be just like, oh man, I had a bad day at work. This day sucked, blah, blah, blah. Be carving your pipe. And no, you got to like have a special moment. You open you're working, you are given a meaning. The sacred meaning you're giving to these items, you're giving it when you're making them as well. So you are thinking about, okay, this pipe I'm carving right now is going to be for ceremony. So it's a special pipe. So I should try to maintain positive, good energy, good thoughts, positive thinking when I'm carving it. If I start getting derailed and going somewhere else and start thinking about my work and my whatever, then I will put it away and take time. It's almost like a meditation time. You also have to do prayer ties, tobacco ties. There are different ways of doing those, but some people do one a day. Some people do big prayer ties. Some people use different colors. There are the colors of the direction that people use, like red, white, yellow, and black. You also have to prepare your regalia, what you're going to use. You're going to use a skirt, use crowns, anklets, bracelets. There's specific items that you have to prepare, and you got to be thinking all year around what you're going to do. It's a huge, huge, huge commitment. If you are going to do something like that and you're going to take a pipe, it's a life commitment. It's not something easy to do. It's something that if you're not taking it serious, you are playing with fire. You're playing with your life, basically. You try to understand what type of commitment you are getting into during the year. You cannot, if you are a believer that these ways are true and they have meaning for you, then you have to fully immerse on it. You have to basically believe what you're doing. So that belief and that commitment towards those ways makes them true and makes them real to you. So you think about, whoa, I'm getting this pipe. I want to dance with it. I want to make a commitment to live on these ways. I have to try to be a good person. I cannot be out there being like a mean guy, trying to do mean things to people, trying to step on people. I had to be truthful to my feelings, truthful to my family. It's a whole way of thinking that you're trying to get into. Basically, you're trying to change your life to walk, and what they call the red road, to try to abstain from from alcoholism, or try to abstain from just being a bad person, I guess. So it's like a transformative, life-changing commitment that you go through. Once you do it, then you start realizing, that it's a difficult path to take, but Is I had, I feel like in my way, because of the way my life has been, I had no other choice than to try to follow up on those commitments that I have made and the path that I have chosen to try to be a good person for my family, for my community, for the planet.
So you spend a year preparing.
Mm-hmm.
You arrive at the ceremony site. Where did it take place at?
There's this place called the Wild Horse Sanctuary in South Dakota. So it's a place that people have been doing ceremony in this beautiful place for a long time. There is a lot of ancient glyphs on the stones. Really special place. So basically, it's just traveling to South Dakota, setting up camp, going to look for sage for your crowns and your anklets, your bracelets, sage for burning, preparing the arbor, preparing the tree, preparing all the teepees where dancers are sleeping. There is camp day where everybody comes to set up camp. And then there is tree day. We all go look for the tree that we're going to be dancing around. And then the next day is the first day of the Sundance.
So let's go to the first day. How does it start?
All days are pretty much almost the same. We get up. The Sundance leader will play this Morning Star song. Then that kind of tells you that it's like 4 a.m. or so. Then later on you get up at sunrise and you have 2 rounds of sweat lodge. Normally the sweat lodge we do are 4 rounds, but we do 2 rounds in the morning. Then we're in ceremony all day, and then we do 2 closing rounds at night. So basically we get up, you put your regalia on, you line up after the sweat. You line up, and there is a group of drummers and singers. There is an arbor that we have set up for the supporters, and we go out to the east gate. We go into the Sundance, and we basically do a circle, or like the 4 direction. So basically we go through one side and we start dancing. There are specific songs that go with it. There are Sundance songs. There are specific ways that you dance it. There are some rounds. There is an entrance round. There are healing rounds. There are exit rounds. There are offering rounds. So we just do this for 4 days.
So each of those songs and each of those accompanying dances each have their own particular meaning?
Yeah, some of them are for, this song is just for the entrance. This song is for healing. This song is for if you are piercing. There is a specific songs that go with it when we're in the round. Yeah, every song, every time they change song, we can change position to face a different direction. Yeah, all the songs have meaning. Some of them don't have wording. Some of them are just the intonations, but they're sacred songs. They've been passed down for generations and generations.
And all this time, you and the other dancers are fasting.
Yeah, we're abstaining from food. We're abstaining from water. It's really difficult, man. I've seen lots of people pass out right next to me dancing, just collapse out of exhaustion, out of the lack of salts and minerals and water and food. And we try not to, the goal is not to die out there. If you need water, you need to drink water. We're not there to just shut our organs down and die. We're there to try to push our limits or to reach our limits. But yeah, we're abstaining from food, which is kind of easy to do. Just a few days, our bodies can go a long time without food. So that's not a problem. The problem is when you're trying to abstain from water. It gets really difficult. And at the same time, you are out there dancing all day. So it's like a marathon. You are out there every day on your feet, dancing several rounds a day for endless hours. Sometimes the rounds are over 4 hours long. So when you are done dancing the round, everybody gets out and you just kind of collapse in your mat. on your teepee, and just you wake up when the eagle whistle goes, and you get up. It's time to put your crown again and go out and do it again. So it's super intense. There are a lot of offerings during the Sundance as well. The belief is that what we truly own is what we come with to this world, which is our body. So the suffering we do by going with the fasting, sometimes there are flesh offerings by males and females and by younger adults. So it's a really intense ceremony.
You mentioned flesh offerings. What is that?
Basically, we have a tree in the center. People are dancing around. So basically, you have pegs that you make. You can make them out of antler, or you can make it out of a strong wood, like osage or choke cherry. Or you can use eagle talons, or you can use antler, deer antlers. But basically, you're making a peg, pointy peg. And basically, they just put this peg through your skin, and this peg gets attached to a rope that you put in the tree. And basically, you are then connected to the tree, and that's your time. That's your most intense prayer. You've been fasting from food and water, and you're basically attached with your skin to the tree. The goal is to pull yourself free from the tree. So basically, when you pull yourself free, there is a little bit of flesh that gets detached. So that flesh gets cut off, and that gets offered to the tree. You make your prayer that way. Some of the women put a little eagle feather attached to their skin in here, and that's how they dance with the eagle feather. And eventually, they go to the tree, and the feather gets pulled. So there's a little bit of flesh that gets hanging here. Some people have different ways of doing it, depending what type of commitment, what type of prayers you're doing. Some people do the eagle dance, get pull up in the tree by their chest. Some people pull from the back. Some people pull skulls, buffalo skulls with their back. And that's all their different ways of doing it. But basically, you offer a little bit of your flesh to the tree of life that we're dancing around.
Pretty intense.
It's pretty intense. Yeah, it can get pretty bloody. That's what I'm saying. You have to be a little bit more open-minded to understand or to see how other cultures do their spirituality and how their worldview is.
It's a vision quest. What did you see during your first ceremony?
Well, like when we talk about vision, yeah, sometimes you can have visions like what people think of visions. Some people, you will be like from the intensity of the heat from the sweat lodge, and no food, no water, and from being in such an intense ceremony, I have drifted off in the sweat lodge and seen things like, oh, whoa, did you guys see those 7 deer that just walked in here? And I'm like, 7 deer? What are you talking about, No, there were 7 deer with big antlers. They just right here in the steam, they walked in front of the sweat lodge, and everybody's like, no, that was just for you. Go figure out what it is, So you can see things like that. There is a lot of people that go into trance-like and they see visions. There's that happens. I really like the visions that carry on for your life. The visions like when you realize your life visions. When you realize, no, this is my life vision is to be a good member of my community. I gotta be able to be a factor for unity and community, and be a instrument of change for the good. My life mission and vision is to create strong, sustainable communities. Or when you realize, no, my vision is to get deeper into primitive skills, ancestral skills. When you realize those big visions, that's when I feel like it gets really, really interesting, because then it's just you're setting up full paths for your life. When you get those big visions, like, no, I have to garden. I have to garden my own food. I have to hunt my own meat. I have to teach people why I do those things. I have to explain to people why those changes are happening, because I believe that's the way to really transform the planet into a better community, into less wars, because of what I've been through. I've been through really conflicts, heavy conflicts, bombings, massacres, and things like that, where like can really derail you. And to transform that and to change it into a vision for good, for the world, for your family, for your community, for everybody that's dancing around with you. Those I feel like are the really important ones when you are able to start seeing your life vision coming together while you are doing that. I feel like I have been able to do that because of these ceremonies.
What are your future plans?
Because of COVID, we're not doing in-person classes anymore in here. We're doing some with social distancing, but we're trying to develop a curriculum for teaching survival and primitive skills online and with a smaller class. I am just trying to see what life presents itself, what life gives me ahead. It's been a crazy journey.
So if people are interested in pursuing primitive skills and the things that you teach, how could they get in touch with you?
Right now I'm working on a website. Basically, I think it's going to be my name, amosrodriguez.com. Right now, you can reach me through also whitepinewilderness.com. You can reach me through social media, Instagram and maybe Facebook. I have Amos Rodriguez Survival handles in Instagram and Facebook.
Well, thank you, Amos, for joining us and sharing these stories. It's been an incredible journey for you. I think it's still ongoing. It's an amazing journey that you've shared with us. We all really appreciate this.
Thank you, guys. I'm really lucky to have the experiences that I have experienced. Even though some of them have been bad, like at the beginning of my life during the conflict and the Civil War of El Salvador, if you can make learning experiences out of those, you can try to advance, try to make a better life.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhardt.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.